In theatres July the 1st, Mr. Malcolm's List is a feature-length period dramedy set during the 19th century. It cleverly examines relationship expectations between two women, as well as their love interests, on the backdrop of high society London, with its rigidly high expectations of marriage as the centre force of social acceptance. As the film's director and one of its producers, Emma Holly-Jones talks to me about the film's two-pronged relationship arc between the two female leads, as well as their respective love interests. She also shares how the set and costume design was meticulously orchestrated to amplify the story's visual grandeur, as well as how blind casting is changing the filmmaking process today. Here's our chat. Emma, I've got to start by saying that when I watch the film, all I can think is yes, yes, yes. So many incredible moments, from the plot lines to the characters, to the way the movie was shot and directed, to the jaw-dropping costumes. It's just, how much time do I need to talk to you? I know that I don't have loads. So I want to start by asking you this. Can you tell me, first off, why Mr. Malcolm's List was a film you needed to direct and produce? Let's start there.
I think I grew up as a massive fan of the 90s rom-com. And,
Okay.
you know, I've always, like, if you asked me, still ask me today, like, who is the sort of filmmaker you want to be? I always used to say, I want to be the female Richard Curtis. Like, he's been, you know, his work and Emma's work, his wife,
Yes.
you know, as writers, like, it's just stuff I have enjoyed so much from such a young age. So when I heard Mr. Malcolm's List first on a Table Read podcast hosted by the Blacklist, and I very much felt that sort of tone and that sort of energy. So it was that really drew me to it initially, was that, you know, that light sense of humor, that wit, that romance. And then, and second to that, obviously, you have to enjoy a period movie to direct a period movie. And I have loved period films for a very long time. I'm not saying I was 100% into Regency. That just happened to be the world that Malcolm's was set in. You know, I've loved everything from the Tudors to Atonement, you know. So yes. It's, you know, it was the sort of meeting of two great sort of genres for me. That is what drew me to it so much. And also I just felt that there was just so much potential there to make something feel good and joyful, and also contemporary for an audience today.
Absolutely. Now, I feel, at least from my perspective, and, you know, other people that I've spoken to, you know, with the initial kind of outtakes of the screenings, is everybody loved it for many, many different reasons. Like, there's loads of layers there that you can just really kind of, you know, go into. And you can tell that you're a lover of these types of films, because the detail, you know, with which this film was kind of layered is just second to none. And I have to ask you this: the film has an all-female producer lineup and strong female characters, making this a film for today, as you mentioned, but albeit set in the 19th century. How did you go about the directing, specifically knowing that you had to keep it aligned with the period that it was set in terms of, you know, the roles and perceptions of women of the time, but to also speak to today's aware audience? Talk to me about that, because you really nailed that, for me at least.
It was one of the biggest things we developed, you know, through, you know, so I did, you know, a director's polish on the script. And I think one of the things that was really key to me was to sort of, you know, bring out this female friendship. And, you know, this is a two-part answer, but, you know, so Laura, we had three female producers. You mentioned Laura Rister, Laura Lewis, and Katie Holly. We all massively wanted the big rom-com ending, but we didn't want this to be just a movie about a girl and a guy getting together. It was also about this female friendship, and every woman, you know, has had those. Sometimes we have more drama with our female friends than we do our partners. So, you know, that was this massive B plot for us. And I wanted to develop it in a very modern way. And that, I have to give massive, you know, props to Zoe and Frida, because it was arguably one of the most important things for them as well. And, you know, they for example, they even wrote letters to each other as Selena and Julia, and they shared those with me. And Zowie's take on Julia was so fresh and so different, and it really was not a villain. She became like the anti-hero of the movie and someone you could
Mhm.
root for yourself. And it all stemmed from conversations between the three of us, because, you know, this idea in 18 that women were basically good for marriage and rearing children, none of us were willing to put that on screen, right?
Mhm.
We didn't want to uh, sort of conform to actually a lot of historical elements that don't make sense to us today as young women. So
Mhm.
it meant everything from, even in the world building, getting them out of drawing rooms, just having cups of tea and waiting for men to call. I was like, screw this. I want them like in their world, living their life, enjoying different things, playing croquet with the boys, going to horse auctions, which women weren't allowed to do. I was like, I want these girls to enjoy the world we are building for them. And second to that, the entire motivation for the film hinged on Zowie's performance and understanding why she did it and why Selena goes along with it. And those two
Mhm.
questions were the most important questions I asked myself every single day. And, you know, for Zowie, we always used to say to each other, it's not about Malcolm, it's about the good of womankind. You know,
Mhm.
this was about being humiliated as a woman in absolutely, in a scenario which you actually had no control over. I always compare the caricature to like the Daily Mail publishing the most embarrassing story or photo of you with absolutely no control or truth.
Right.
And what that meant was this, you know, spark of, you know, revenge to sort of get her power back and own it. But she also goes on this wonderful journey of self-discovery with this, you know, childhood friend. And they end up realizing that they're more of the same mind, you know, even though they're from completely different class structures. And they're connecting over the fact that they are women in this time fighting against these rules and fighting against these rituals together. I always used to
Mhm.
remind people, you know, when Selena and Julia meet in the beginning of the movie, they're not really friends. I kept saying that throughout the whole thing. You know, I was like,
Mhm.
they haven't seen each other in what, 14 years? I was like, you know, Julia's invited her here for, you know, pretty dodgy reason. Like, and that love between them is almost like we watch Malcolm and Selena and fall in love. We also watch Julia and Selena fall in love.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, that scene at the end where Julia sort of admits her faults, Zowie wrote a lot of that. A lot of that was improv. A lot of that was her, you know, massively, you know, feeling like she had to explain to Frida, she had to explain to Selena why she did it. And I think it made the movie so much richer. And I think it made it, you know, so wonderful for me as a woman to connect to on in this completely new way. So yeah, 100%, like everything you said, it's all things, it means the world to me to hear that, because we all worked so hard on trying to make this two very rounded female characters, and it wasn't just a princess meets the prince story.
Absolutely. And this comes down to the fact that we have now representation of women behind the camera. I think that that's why these stories are being told that really resonate to, you know, female kind, you know. Another part that I really wanted to kind of, you know, dive into was just this interesting aspect about the film's ability to fuse melodrama and comedy at the same time. I felt this kind of from beginning to end going on. And I shared this with Frida when we chatted about the film, that I kind of felt like, you know, if a novel was ever to be birthed between Jane Austen and Oscar Wilde, this would be it. How did you bring this to life, Emma? I'm really interested because, you know, the balance between the melodrama on one side and the comedy on the other was so brilliantly captured that each of them kind of amplified the effect of the other. Talk to me a little bit about that. I really felt that.
I think I'm gonna choose to give you a really personal answer.
Okay.
um before I shot the movie, I lost my father while I was making the movie, and I lost my my dog.
Oh
I was
gosh.
dealing with all before production and after production, during post, during the whole thing. I was actually grieving the entire time in different
Hmm.
ways and different fathoms of that. But every day I got to set and I was still made to laugh. And I realized something that I was taught a very long time ago by an English teacher, that tragedy and drama enhance the best of comedy.
Mm.
So I was actively living, I think, and growing to understand is just the complexity of human emotions.
Yeah.
And I really, really felt that balance sort of come through. I think what I was experiencing in my personal life,
Yeah.
started to come through in the film, because, I think on a lighter note, the scene where Henry and Julia finally, make, seal the deal, the choice of the footman walking in, and it's just this idea that you're constantly yo-yoing between emotions. And I've always loved that in
Hmm.
certain movies. And it's not just me, it's also the actors' unbelievable ability to see opportunity in any given moment. They were all so good at observing each other and observing what they were doing, and this reactional based comedy, which
Hmm.
then was my job to make sure I had it all on a hard drive and capturing it and covering it. And then I have this wonderful female editor called Kate Hickey, who is just unbelievable with comic timing. And, for example, the scene in the drawing room at the beginning where Selena arrives in London, that's a long scene. And Ollie
Hmm.
sat there for a long time with not much to say, but yet, if you put the camera on him, he was doing a hell of a lot. And it was brilliant. And even though there's this entire scheme and drama and it's very serious and Julia's really seeking revenge and she's really persuading, Ollie's little eye movements and eye rolls, really sort of keep the pace up and keep that
Yes.
moving. But also, I think my approach to comedy in general has always been very observational. I don't
Hmm.
like to, I like wit and I like dry humor. And I think Oscar Wilde is the perfect example. I think that's, that's the Oscar Wilde element of this film is, what Suzanne had sort of embedded in these characters was the ability for them to sort of see the ridiculousness in each other. And John and Molly, for example, the footman and the maid, are like the perfect example of that. They're like the Rosenstans and Guildenstern of, the movie.
They were
So
brilliant.
I know I'm talking a lot, but
Oh, I'm loving
a
every
number of
second.
things come into that. And truthfully, at the core, it's just my sense of humor.
Hmm.
So,
And your Brit. I
yeah.
think that says it all. So I
So,
want to ask you this because this has to be addressed. The film was blind cast, and I know that this isn't typically a producer's area, but I still want to ask you about this, Emma, because it's become a trend in Hollywood and Western cinema. We look at David Copperfield, Bridgerton. They're just two examples of that. Talk to me about what people should know who aren't clear about what this actually means and the impact of this for actors and filmmaking and society that's watching these films today, because there's something bigger happening here.
yeah, I think if the question is more about the impact, I think the impact is there's a whole genre of stories waiting to be told that hopefully, people start to finance. Like on a purely business note,
Yeah.
a lot of people have said, there's why are people making remakes? Why are people not, doing new things? And the truth is because there's a lot of barriers to money in Hollywood. So
Yeah.
those barriers need to come down. So hopefully, like things like Malcolm's List and Bridgerton, and even if you go back to Amara Sante's Belle, like people start to realize there is a multitude of brilliant voices from different cultures and different stories, but the people and the gatekeepers need to finance these things. It took us 7 years to get this movie made. It is not easy. And all we can hope is that the next person who chooses to do the, to do a story in a more diverse manner, or chooses to tell a story from a different culture or a different country, there is someone who saw this film who realizes that the idea that this is a risk is nonsense, and that these people deserve as much financial support as all the films we're continuing to see, get made. So for me, talking about impact, I think it really comes back down to the business of Hollywood and how that still has a long way to go. And we still, there's going to be many more people after us still hammering and trying to break those walls down.
And I think that's probably why it's so much more important that different ethnicities, as well as the female quotient, start to own the purse strings. I think that's going to really
100%.
change the trajectory. I got to ask you a very frivolous question, but it's one I just need to ask you as a woman that loves fashion. You got to talk to me about this fabulous clothing that was in there, the costumes. You could tell that a lot of thought, research, and skill went into it. It was so evident. Those hats, I need a hat like that. Talk to me about this.
Calm down. A legend. She's so un-tech savvy. Like, she's very hard to get on the phone or on a social media platform or on email. She's massively approached this from research and other movies and inspirations, but also just her own knowledge. I first learned about Pam because she worked on a show called The Spanish Princess. So I really knew I was in very, very, very good hands. And felt very, very, very lucky to have her say yes to this. And I think the most impressive thing about what they did was this was an indie budget. We did not have mountains of money to make this movie. And the costume department and the production design department, what they did on the money they had was absolutely extraordinary. And
you couldn't tell. You couldn't tell.
It's just insane. And everything from knowing we only can make very few pieces because it's an expensive process, and knowing exactly, like, working with me and working with the production designer to know if we're going to make a piece, it needs to be in the shot, so what scenes do they work in, there was so much prep and so much consideration into every single look. And then talking about color, like, the first thing Pam, Ray, and I did was build color palettes for each world. So we split it into 3. It was very much country, London, Hadley Hall, and how those colors merged and changed, and also the nods in those color palettes. Dalton Cottage, it's got all those lovely, like, the mustards and the reds and the browns, and everything that we felt represented Frida and her, and her interpretation of Selena. And then we move into these, like, blues and these cools and purples and reds, and that richness with the sort of wealth of Julia and the London society world, and then into these whites and blacks and golds for Hadley Hall. And every single shot was planned in the sense of color. So if we knew we were shooting in a blue drawing room, we made sure that those costumes worked perfectly with the blue and the gold, and that was in the room. So I wanted everything to very much feel like a painting if you paused it. And if you look at artwork from the time, Thomas Gainsborough was a huge inspiration to all of us, because his big pastoral English country landscapes, there's always these tiny pops of color that just bring your eye, bring the piece off the page as such. So everything, from, like, her one pink skirt in the green art gallery, it's all been so considered. But I will never forget, they made the hat with the pheasant. And I remember when she showed me that, and I was just like, it's just,
oh my gosh,
it's just so good. I think I remember at one point when I was blocking the scene, like, making sure, like, everything, you're starting to make sure you can see that detail and you can see what she's been doing. But that's all her. Like, I just love the fact that she came in, she was like, I just thought it'd be really funny if she had a dead pheasant on her hat. It's kind of key that she's going to be very good at shooting, but you don't pick up on it. And it's that level of detail that's such a joy as a director to see people bring to the table. And they've all made me look exceptionally good, and it's all them. And I am I was very, very lucky to have such talented people work on this and bring it to life.
And Emma, I'm sure they'll say the same thing about you. What an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You know, before we close off, I need to ask you this, to encourage everyone watching, listening, and reading this to kind of go out and watch this film for all the reasons that we've talked about, and so many more that they'll discover when they go watch it. It's kind of one of those films that each time you watch it, you find something new. It truly is that, you know, well detailed and layered. What's the core message of the film, and why should people go and watch it?
I'm going to say something very simple.
Okay.
Because it should make you feel good. That's the underlying drive of everything I have done and everything I have put into this for 7 years, was to make something that made people feel as good as movies in the past have made me feel. People are going to love it, people are going to hate it, but I'm sure there is something in there for everyone that just makes you chuckle, or makes you hopeful about falling in love, or makes you look at your husband with a bigger smile than you did yesterday. And that's the privilege I get to have doing this job. And it's very much what I want to continue doing.
Oh, thank you so much, Emma. What an absolute pleasure. If that wasn't enough for people to want to kind of go out and be inquisitive about all of the things that we've talked about, I don't know what else would be. Such a pleasure speaking to you. I want to wish you the
pleasure to you too. Pleasure to meet you too. Sorry.
Thank you so much. And, you know, I wish you the very best with the film. And I can't even imagine anyone not thinking it's fabulous, because there's just so much in it that's fabulous. Thank you so much, Emma. And God bless your father and your dog.
I know they
were there with you.
They were there with me, so yeah. I'm sure they're together now somewhere. So thank you.
Well, they're probably together with you, supporting you. That's what I believe in.
Thank you.
Miss Dalton, it is common knowledge you have been cast into this world without fortune or prospects. It is my desire to have you as my wife.
I am greatly honored by your offer, but I cannot accept.
This offer will not be extended a second time.
Third, actually.
Out of my way, idiot geese!
My dearest Selina, will you come visit me in London? I promise you will be well entertained. I need your assistance. There is a gentleman, Mr. Malcolm. He humiliated me. No. I then found out he had a list.
You have a list of qualifications for a bride.
I would love for Mr. Malcolm to receive the comeuppance he deserves. Plus, it could be rather fun. If we present you as the perfect woman, then he discovers he does not meet the requirements on your list. That would be a perfect sort of poetic justice.
Mr. Malcolm, there's someone I want to introduce you to, Miss Selina Dalton.
I'm very pleased to make your acquaintance. Perhaps you might join me for a tour of the picture gallery.
Most certainly have a reputation.
Is that the famous Mr. Malcolm? Do you know him?
And you believe this description of me?
He was very impressed by her wit and humor.
I must be nearsighted.
May I assist?
Selina, it is working.
Why did you come to London, Miss Dalton?
Because I was lonely.
I was lonely too before you came.
Your list is a shield. You did not want to give your heart to a woman unworthy.
It gives us hope, and hope is a good thing.
Perhaps I am mistaken in thinking hope a useless thing.
You're being blinded by his intelligent conversation and devastatingly handsome good looks. What?
You thought to humiliate Malcolm, and you end up presenting him with the perfect wife, and that must sting.
Wish me luck, old boy.
I don't think you'll meet it.
It is time to show Malcolm your list.
I do not think Mr. Malcolm is the man you think he is.
Seems you have been deceiving me from the beginning.
Love cannot be planned so carefully. It will stir things up a bit. That is part of its charm.